Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome back to the Global CISO Forum, Day 2. I'm still your host, Amber Pedroncelli, and with me to kick things off on our second day is Mr. KEYAAN Williams. He is, of course, a very good friend of the program, a very good friend of EC Council, as well as the founder and managing director of Class LLC. He's managed security programs for the CDC. He's a member of the Private Directors Association Atlanta chapter, and he currently serves as the chair of the Risk Committee for Global Nonprofits. Today, he's speaking on the board perspective on cybersecurity risk. Welcome, KEYAAN. Take it away.
Thanks, Amber, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody who showed up. I know that online events are not as dynamic and exciting as the good old days when we used to get together in Atlanta in the past. My hope is that I make this worth your time, that it's interesting, and that you get a lot of value from your participation. Because this is the Global CISO Forum, most of the content that I have is geared towards an executive leadership audience. My hope is that if there are any people who are still growing in their careers, that they learn something interesting, and then everybody else has some new nuggets or a new perspective that they can apply to their real work. As we go through the presentation, I want everybody to keep one thing in mind. There is more to security than penetration testing and security operations. The idea was kind of bubbling up in my mind as I was hanging out in the Hacker Halted sessions, and those are very technical. It's great content, but most people, when they think about cybersecurity, if we were to, play the game by show of hands, raise your hand if you think about business people in suits. When you think about cybersecurity, very few hands would go up. If we flip the question around and said, by show of hands, raise your hand if you think about people typing and cracking code on keyboards, or wearing hoodies, or sitting in dark rooms, allowing the computer screen to illuminate the face, everybody would put their hands up because Hollywood presents a wrong image of what security is about. And so while penetration testing and security operations are very important, in reality, cybersecurity is a diverse profession that allows people, regardless of their race, gender, nationality, color, creed, or professional background, to contribute to success. In fact, I've seen people with backgrounds in psychology, business administration, law, policy, and project management contribute to the profession as much as the security professionals who have deep technical backgrounds. The cool thing about cybersecurity is that inclusivity is built into the profession because anybody who can apply relevant knowledge, skills, and experience can participate in protecting whatever organization hires them to serve and contribute to success. My goal in this conversation today, because it's the Global CISO Forum, is to talk about cybersecurity leadership. Now, if you didn't join us for the panel yesterday, you may have noticed I'm not doing slides because leadership is all about communication. And I personally just happen to communicate much more effectively if I'm talking to the audience rather than just reading a slide and hoping that you're paying attention and following along. The thing that I want you to think about for this first presentation of day 2 is what makes a person a cybersecurity leader. Although my career started in telecommunications, I would argue that anyone responsible for establishing, executing, and making decisions about the vision and the direction of an organization's cybersecurity related resources is going to be a leader. If you're in charge of things, it kind of causes you to be a leader, regardless of what your title says or what your HR people tell you about yourself. I want you to notice in my description that I didn't say CISO. Now, I've been a CISO. I'm obviously an advocate of the Certified CISO program because of how much I contributed to the book and because I still teach the content. But I want you to recognize that there's more to security leadership than the title and the management of technical teams and resources. Leadership comes from influence. Influence comes from your ability to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of your company and its business practices that are established to support security goals and initiatives. So I've known numerous CISOs who were horrible leaders. They had no influence. It was just a person with a title who was in a position. On the other side of the coin, I've known people with no significant title or position in their company who performed extraordinary work on behalf of their organizations to protect the assets and the interests of those companies. And so if we go beyond the title and the role, and the number one question that often comes up when I'm teaching the Certified CISO program And the biggest debate that we have is the position and the role of the CISO in the organization. In reality, my description of cybersecurity leadership means that as a CISO or as a security leader, you can sit in any chair in the organization as long as you are equipped and have the resources that are necessary for you to accomplish your goal. And so I know that most CISOs report to the CIO. That is a statistical fact, but that's a legacy approach, and it's born from the fact that security leadership was an extension of technology leadership. If you look at the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, also known as NICE, the framework is a good resource for describing what modern security leadership looks like today. It establishes a taxonomy, it provides a lexicon, and clearly defines the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to be considered a security leader. If you look at the knowledge, skills, abilities, and even some of the job tasks that are highlighted, most of what NICE talks about for executive cybersecurity leadership are business-oriented skills. You know, most CISOs that I know, and even the majority of the security people that I talk to, can check every single box about technology. Many people that I encounter are inexperienced in the business-oriented skills, and that's really the reason that we're here today. With the time that I have remaining, my goal is to highlight a few essential non-technical leadership skills, a couple of perspectives that go along with those that will equip everybody, whether you're listening live or you listen to the recording later, to influence and make a difference in the effectiveness of security practices in your respective companies. The first principle, if you really want to make a difference, is to know your audience. I spend significant time working with people who serve on boards of directors. As Amber mentioned in her reading of my biography, I'm the chair of the risk committee for a global nonprofit. I serve in a leadership position for the Private Directors Association in the Atlanta chapter, and then I also do some of the education initiatives for the National Private Directors Association. It is a great organization. My panelists yesterday are all members of the Private Directors Association as well. But the amount of time that I spend with people who serve on boards of directors has changed my perspective about security work, how it functions, and what leaders are supposed to be doing. So the ideas presented today are based on my recognition that the board and senior executives at a company have a fiduciary duty to act for the benefit of the organization that they represent. When I was on the board for ISSA International and my current role and in previous roles, every time you do your onboarding, they stress over and over again your fiduciary duty as a board member. And a fiduciary is defined as the responsibility to act for the benefit of the organization. The primary fiduciary duty that board members have, regardless of their background, whether they're CEOs or CFOs or some other business role, is to work on behalf of the organization to reduce risks and to respond quickly to incidents and to provide shareholder value. Now, risks and incidents isn't really a security focused item, but it aligns very closely with some of the major work that security people do. But I could have a risk of a failed business initiative, or I could have an incident where we have a public relations nightmare because somebody is doing something wrong and it affects the entire organization. Many of the things that board members are already doing on a daily basis align very closely with what we do as security professionals. The trick is to take what we normally describe in specific technical terms and communicate those items in a format and in a context that makes sense to the board members who are already risk management professionals, who are already competent business leaders, and who are already thinking about everything that the organization is facing. Now, when you think about everything that the organization is facing, there are a lot of things that organizations have to consider. If we boil it down to security related concerns that boards are talking about, they organize into 4 different categories that I'll focus on today. The conversation could be longer if we open the floor for questions and had a more robust conversation. And so most board people that I talk to, whether I'm advising boards or I'm just hanging out with my friends, most board people are concerned about supply chain attacks. SolarWinds was new to a lot of people. If you work as a security professional, SolarWinds is nothing new when we talk about supply chain attacks and vendor risk management, because these kinds of things go all the way back to 2013 with Target, and they have continued where you've had some kind of major breach year after year, sometimes month after month, that is the result of bad vendor management or supply chain practices. Another reality that just exists is that few organizations invest what is necessary to create trustworthy and resilient systems. So I hang out with some great people from NIST. There is a huge initiative for system security engineering, and the principles from SSE should apply whether an organization is building the system, the service, or the application themselves or buying it from someone else. Now, when you start building economics into the process, there is an economic incentive to deliver your product, service, or result to the marketplace first, because the first one to the market has the greatest market share, and market share equals revenue. And so these are the ways that businesses are thinking. It often causes them to overlook the long-term value of stopping, pausing, and making sure that you have designed your solution securely, that you build security in, that it is a well-created system, service, or application. On top of that, as you transition from the old days before I was gray, when everything was on mainframe, to now where you have cloud services and integrated applications and application programming interfaces and the things that we use in 2021 to tie everything together, the complexity of systems and applications and the way that they function makes it almost impossible to completely understand how do these things work and what is the total number of risks that are associated with them. Finally, and probably the most important reality that people have to face at the board level so that they can respond properly and put the right solutions and countermeasures in place is the idea that beyond compliance, most organizations have significant room to improve the effectiveness of the controls that they put in place for security and privacy. Now, my goal is not to say that people are horrible, but if you measure the distance between an effective program and a compliant program, there is a lot of space in between those two landmarks that measure success. And so given these realities, the question that falls on security leaders is, how do you advise the board about how to respond, where to invest, and what resources are necessary to achieve something that resembles an effective, mature, and successful program for the organization? Now, if you missed our panel discussion yesterday, my friends Nazi, Wanda, Noel, and Dave shared great insights about the best and worst things that security has presented to them as board members. So it's a great reason to go back, to look at the recording, to explore the topic on your own time, and think about how you can apply that wisdom to the situation that you were facing personally. Today, because this is just a single person giving a presentation, I have a little more flexibility to dig a little deeper into the topic. And so I organized my conversation into 3 points that break down into, number one, traditional risk management frameworks and how they work and how they function. How do you build upon what traditional frameworks provide for you? And what the heck are we going to do about cyber insurance? And so if we go to the first topic, one thing that I'd like to argue is that when you're talking to the board, because most of your board members are risk management professionals, your conversation about security, the value of security, and the benefits that they provide could start with just traditional risk management frameworks. And so whether you use ISO 27005 for information security risk management, or you use ISO 31000 for enterprise risk management, or you use my favorite tool, NIST 800-37 for information security risk management, or you use COSO, or anything else, most risk management approaches follow the same standard model. You're going to establish context, you're going to conduct a risk assessment, you're going to apply risk treatment, you're going to monitor your results, and you're going to communicate the effectiveness of all of your efforts to leadership. Now, as I describe this, I assume most of you that are CISOs are familiar with this. If you've done the certified CISO program, you've been tested on this. And so it's the same approach, whether we're talking about security risk, business risk, financial risk, operational risk, or any other risk. Risk is risk, and you use a similar framework or approach to evaluate your risk, understand your exposure, and then provide an appropriate type of response. Taking it to the next level, if we're really going to be successful with risk management, the organization at the board of directors level has to formally document the risk appetite and describe the capacity for risk taking that exists within the organization. Now, these conversations, risk appetite and risk capacity, rarely show up in standards and guidelines. They rarely show up in executive education, or anywhere else, outside of the financial services industry, few organizations are mature enough to even take the time to formally document a risk appetite statement. The risk appetite statement, if you do it the traditional way, using the model provided by financial services, is going to come from the board of directors, and the board of directors is going to declare the acceptable level of losses related to lost revenue, lost system uptime, failure to satisfy regulatory requirements, and the harm to the reputation of the organization. Now, if I put my business hat on, all of these risk areas all point back to revenue. If we're not satisfying our regulatory requirements, there's going to be a fine that affects the bottom line. If our systems don't stay up and are not available to deliver our product, service, or result, there's going to be some loss of revenue. I imagine that Facebook and all their properties lost some meaningful revenue for themselves directly, and it probably affected a lot of customers, who are angry because they lost revenue because the system was down for 6 hours. But whether it's revenue, whether it's uptime, whether it's regulatory requirements, or it's just the reputation of the organization, the way that you measure this starts with the board of directors saying how much is acceptable. Once that level of acceptability is established, you now have the ability to represent risk on a scale of low, moderate, or high. When I do this with customers and when I've done it for my own organizations, what we usually do is we take the concept of risk appetite and say that anything that falls within the boundaries that were established is going to be low risk. So if you work for a company that has a lot of revenue and the board said we're willing to lose $1 million worth of revenue before we jump up and down like Rumpelstiltskin, well, anything less than $1 million is going to be a low risk activity from a financial risk perspective. If you've done your business impact analysis and you know how long a system can be down before it starts affecting revenue, then you might say that, well, this specific business system can be down for 36 hours before we realize $1 million worth of losses. And so now we've used revenue to identify the risk appetite for financial losses and for system outages. You repeat the process for regulations, you repeat the process for reputation, but everything that falls within the boundaries is going to be something that you define as low risk, that the board recognizes as low risk, because everything that you're presenting relates to what the board has said is the acceptable losses. And when you start talking about moderate risk, instead of using the approaches that we normally see in security textbooks and other content, moderate risk is really an indication that you're getting close to the boundary, whatever the upper boundary is. If I'm at $900,000 and we're getting close to $1 million, well, then we would say that is a moderate risk because it hasn't exceeded the boundary, but it's getting very close. And it's an item that helps drive action and some kind of response to reduce risk and get it closer to $500,000 or below. Similarly, high risk in the approach that I'm describing is going to be any risk, whether it's revenue, operations, regulatory requirements, or your reputation, that exceeds whatever that boundary is that was set by the board. And so you can see in my conversation that the board defining the acceptable losses puts security in a very good position to have a meaningful conversation about how well we're managing risk and how well we're keeping risk inside the boundaries that the business defined, instead of allowing Gartner or the industry or benchmarking or anything else describe how much we are willing to risk before we jump into action, apply controls, and do something to reduce the potential harm that is faced by the company. It's a real decision-making process when you can put it in that kind of format, because it causes everybody to stand up, pay attention, and understand the results from the decisions that are made. My second item, as I described, was that more advanced organizations are building upon the foundation provided by traditional risk management models, and hopefully I gave you a constructive example. But beyond that, instead of using a qualitative approach, they are trying to quantify risk and present better information to the board. Now, risk quantification is awesome on paper. It is a horrible exercise in practice if you do not have significant resources and significant information. So one of my favorite tools for risk quantification is factor analysis of information risk, or FAIR. FAIR is awesome, but FAIR is not meant for the entire organization. The best part of FAIR is that it has an ontology that allows everyone to speak the same language about risk. You know, in the certified CISO program and in other places, we talk about the value of FAIR because it represents risk in financial terms. The issue with FAIR is that modeling the results requires that you apply the process to each threat facing an individual asset. And so if you think about threat and vulnerability management or threat modeling, you could have 100 different threats combined with vulnerabilities related to a single asset within the organization. And now I have multiplied the level of effort required to do FAIR analysis times 100 for one asset. And then I have to repeat that times whatever number of threats for the second asset, and then the third asset, and then the fourth asset. If we assume for our conversation that assets are information systems that store, process, and transmit valuable information, most organizations have at least 10 assets. You have an information system for finance and accounting. You have one for back office and business operations. Email is an asset. Your data servers are an asset. Your publicly facing website is an asset. Every one of those assets is going to have a collection of threats that they face, and each threat is going to produce a outcome of negative consequence that has some financial number assigned to it. Most organizations that I've encountered have far more than 10 assets, and each of those assets has a number of threats that they're facing. And so now you can see whether you do addition or multiplication, you are producing a lot of data to figure out what is our risk and what is that represented in financial terms. When you're presenting information to the board, it has to be specific and actionable, and it is very difficult to be specific and actionable if you're talking about the financial impact for thousands of possible threats that could occur or could not occur that have various impact on the organization. Normally, if you're going to use FAIR, the best approach for FAIR requires that you know your critical assets in advance, which means you have to have a good inventory of your assets. It requires that you know all of your assets, and then you have to have done something like business impact analysis so that you understand the impact of an outage for the critical assets within the organization and what that does for the loss of revenue or the impact of regulatory requirements or the harm to your reputation. And so you can see from the conversation, it gets very complex and it ties lots of items together. Applying FAIR to the entire organization becomes very difficult and very time consuming if you don't have all of the information that we've described. The other issue that comes up when you talk about risk management and you're presenting risk information to the board is that many people, when you talk about cybersecurity risk, look to cyber insurance to be a solution to address lots of the problems that they're facing. The issue with cyber insurance is that insurance is not really a risk management tool the way people frame it. Now, I know in your textbook, I know even in the certified CISO body of knowledge, we say that your risk treatment options are to accept the risk, to avoid the risk, to mitigate the risk by putting controls in place, or to transfer the risk. And risk transfer in our context says that we're going to get cyber insurance. The issue is that cyber insurance is only valuable if you use it properly, and insurance as a risk management tool is really focused on financial risk and business continuity. In reality, when you look deeply at the details of insurance, insurance doesn't change the impact that a major cyber incident has on the organization. Insurance doesn't change the nature of the risk that you face. What insurance does is it provides financial resources that allow the organization to continue operating, but only if the claim is allowable and paid by the insurance company in a timely manner. And so insurance is not going to stop you from having a ransomware attack. Insurance, if your insurance company covers ransomware, is going to provide money so that you can provide remediation, restore operations, do forensic analysis, and contribute to your PR nightmare that is about to take place because the organization has been knocked offline. For success with cyber insurance and for the board to satisfy their fiduciary duty of care, presentations to the board about cyber risk must highlight the effectiveness and the adequacy of controls and safeguards that have been implemented to protect the organization. If I have controls in place, I am likely going to be less susceptible to a data breach, to a successful cyber attack, to something that might lead to ransomware, but I would argue that ransomware is preventable with the right controls. If controls are missing or inadequate based on your assessment and all the work that you're doing, then your report to the board should be, why are these controls missing? Why are the controls inadequate? What is your recommendation to the board about how to fix it? What are the options? Because you always want to present 3 options to business people so they can choose the best option from the choices available, given the resources that they have. You also want to identify how much each option costs. And so saying the why, the how, the what, how much is it going to cost, puts the board in a position to make an informed decision and go beyond just knowing that there's a problem, but contributing to the remediation of the problem that you have identified as a security executive or as a security leader. Now, we have a duty as security leaders to prevent or to present relevant and actionable information to the board. When you think about cyber insurance, the reason that this is so critical is that the failure to implement essential security practices across the globe, across all companies, is leading the cost of insurance to increase, while the coverage that is provided by your cyber insurance is decreasing. Insurance companies are starting to scrutinize claims, and they even go as far as working to verify the root cause of the incident before making a payment. And so it's not a situation where we understand our exposure, we're obtaining insurance to offset the cost of that exposure, and then if the exposure materializes because somebody exploits a vulnerability, we'll file a claim, we'll get money, and then everything will be okay. Many claims these days that exist for preventable incidents are being denied. And so you notice in the conversation, I said that ransomware is preventable if you have the right controls, the right configuration, the right countermeasures in place. And I am starting to see a lot of cyber insurance companies are not paying claims for ransomware because they also know that ransomware is preventable. So it's imperative that the board reviews policies, compares insurance policies and options to establish practices. Security should present to the board answers to good questions related to the situation that the organization is facing, and making sure that you're in a position to do what insurance is not supposed to do. You know, if we put this in the context of car insurance as an example, my car insurance is not going to allow me to file a claim because my engine seized because I've driven 100,000 miles and never changed the oil. There are day-to-day practices that have to take place so the car can function properly. Insurance is for extraordinary things that we encounter that there was no way to anticipate or expect. You know, you hear in security presentation after security presentation that the adversary is becoming more capable, they have advanced tactics, they have all of these resources. Cybercrime is becoming a business, and so there should be no surprise that cyber criminals are attacking organizations that don't have good countermeasures or controls in place. The goal is to convince the board and management within your organization to dedicate appropriate resources to reduce risk as much as possible so that you never have to file a claim, and then the insurance is there only for extraordinary things. One of the biggest problems with insurance, and I'm starting to see this pop up very regularly, is that where the problem is related to the way that organizations respond to the insurance questionnaires that you get from your insurance broker or directly from the company. Now, cyber insurers, as I have described in this part of the conversation, are excluding more and more perils and saying that far fewer things are covered by insurance. In reality, insurance companies are under no obligation to provide coverage to a company that they deem too risky to insure because of the way the company or a certain subset of the company operates. Even for my business, I don't have coverage for application development. It would have required a different writer. There is a lot of risk to my insurance company for professional liability if I develop a software application that leads to the breach of a customer that used the software. So I don't deal with software whatsoever because it's too risky and it makes my insurance premium too high. But insurance companies operate and think the same way. The goal of the cyber insurance questionnaire is to evaluate the risk of providing insurance to a potential customer, and based on the answers that are provided, it also helps determine the premium, the policy, and the coverage limits. the answer to every question on the cyber insurance questionnaire matters. Most of the questions are binary. They'll only allow a yes or no answer. They provide no room for explanation for nuance. And so, for example, admitting that no antivirus protection exists may drastically increase the premium paid for your insurance policy, or it could lead the insurance company to deny coverage. Imagine if you were subject to PCI, you say that you don't have antivirus, but requirement 5 from PCI says that antivirus is a requirement. Now you're intentionally operating without something that is required by a contractual obligation. Your insurance company is not going to cover damages for something that you know in advance is required. So the question now becomes, how does a company answer binary questions about controls that are partially implemented? It comes down to conversations. The board needs to understand what your positioning is. The board needs to understand what it will take to increase the control from partially implemented to fully implemented, and the business value of having the controls fully implemented so that you have the coverage that you need and you make it, or you make the organization a better organization for insurance. Now, the lack of nuance and the pressure to exaggerate often drives companies to distort the situation for the benefit of lower premiums, or simply to obtain coverage for a risky company that would otherwise be denied insurance coverage. Most insurers, unfortunately, are going to conduct thorough investigations when a claim is filed. If I have a car accident, they're going to read the accident report to make sure that I was not driving under the influence. Similarly, if you have a data breach, the insurance company often is going to send their own investigators to evaluate the situation, look at the logs, and verify that all of your obligations were met before they pay the claim that was filed to contribute to your success in the situation. And so being precise and being accurate in your answers is valuable. Working with the board and management and the organization so that you have the resources so that you can answer all the questions truthfully and completely is also in your best interest. Now, thinking about the relationship between security as a function and your role in that function as a security leader and the members of the board of directors who are receiving all this information, your greatest opportunity for success is to know your organization and to know the people who are making the important decisions. For those of you that don't spend significant time with boards of directors, the real work of the board is not done at the board meeting that happens every quarter. The real work of the board happens in the committee level. My role as the chair of the risk committee causes me to be in numerous meetings every month throughout the year, and then we provide a summary report of our findings, our decisions, and everything else that's taking place at the board meeting. Committees are also a good place to be familiar with because committees are made up of directors on the board and company executives, and the committee work is organized and made accountable by a committee charter. So if you are reporting to the risk committee, which is the committee that I run, the risk committee has a charter that describes the oversight and the responsibilities of that committee, the reporting structure and the results that should be produced, and the committee chair reports out on charter progress at each full board meeting. The three primary committees on a public board provide a good foundation for understanding how boards are structured. You have an audit committee that does a lot of oversight and guidance for finance, for risk, and for cybersecurity. You have a compensation committee that focuses on how you're going to compensate the CEO and executive management. And then you have a nominating and governance committee where governance is related very closely to security. Most companies that I'm familiar with personally provide cyber risk oversight either through the audit committee or through the nominating and governance committee, because those are both good oversight functions. Now, obviously, every company is different. These committees, or the way that these committees support the day-to-day business and how they handle issues, are going to vary. Knowing which committee has a charter for cybersecurity and risk oversight is really the important fact from this conversation. When you look at the charters, you see who's responsible for what. It allows you to improve how well the company receives, processes, and takes action on the information that's provided by the CISO, as long as you're providing the right information. Now, one of the things that has taken place, and it started happening about 2019, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has a document that's called Principles of Corporate Governance that describes how governance should happen at a national level. In addition to the Principles of Corporate Governance, they also have a Corporate Governance Factbook that comes out every couple of years. In June of 2021, the Corporate Governance Factbook 2021 highlights that assigning the role of risk oversight to a board committee is becoming common in large companies. Many companies are mandating that the audit committee or a separate risk committee address cybersecurity risk, and these types of comments from reputable organizations put you in a good position to advocate for your company, whether you have a board of directors or not, assigning a specific group of executive leadership with the responsibility for risk oversight. And then that starts to address our silly argument about where the CISO should report. If the CISO is reporting to the committee that is responsible for oversight of cybersecurity risk, you have the best opportunity to provide factual, actionable information to people who are going to do something about everything that you're talking about. This leads us into some of my closing comments, and then if we have time, I'm happy to take questions. My most important closing comment is that effective security and an effective relationship between the CISO and the board requires a top-down approach where the board defines the standard, management and staff execute that standard, security is contributing as part of executive staff. Security leaders as key staff have an obligation to the board. Your obligation to the board as a CISO is to provide relevant and actionable information. I've said it over and over again. My hope is that through the process of repetition, the idea is imprinted in your mind. You want to make sure that you're equipping your board of directors or senior management to make intelligent decisions about all of the risks that the organization is facing, ideally prioritized by the things of the greatest significance or greatest consequence. So you want to stop focusing only on legacy systems. If you have the opportunity to present to the board, the only thing that you want to say about legacy systems once the board is aware of the risk is what has changed and what are we going to do about it. Don't tell the board how to build the sausage. Board members are very smart people. They have just dedicated significant time in areas other than cybersecurity. They need to know what's the problem, what is the solution, how much is it going to cost, and what are my options. If we're using sausage as the example, are we grilling it, baking it, or frying it? They really don't need to know how the sausage is made. Another very important item thinking about security and the relationship to the board is to not use weak measurement tools. You don't want to say, there's no big deal, there's nothing to see here. You don't want to go to the other extreme and say, hey, everything's okay, there's nothing to worry about. You want to clearly, specifically, and effectively highlight what has happened, what has taken place, what is the situation, and what are we going to do about it. And presenting problems along with the recommended solutions is going to give you a lot of credibility and get the board to be engaged and involved in what you're talking about. And so I can only cover so much in 45 minutes, so I'll bring this to a close. I'll answer a couple of questions as we have time. My hope is that you receive value from a business conversation about cybersecurity and the board. If you don't have the certified CISO credential, this is also my opportunity to give a plug. I wrote a lot of the book. I didn't do it by myself, but it's an awesome program that I still teach. And there are lots of organizations that are presenting this content and making it available. If you already have the certified CISO credential and you're thinking about the next step, I am taking 30 people and their +1 to Bermuda in April to turn all of this theory into practice. And I'm helping people develop their strategic plans that align security initiatives with the business. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out. I am happy to share more information, but this isn't a sales pitch, it's just a nugget about the next thing that's happened. Now, related to the questions, I am so out of the loop on how to use GoToWebinar. Hey, Amber, I need your help. If you can either post them in the chat or just help facilitate, I'll be happy to answer a couple of them that came up. I just don't see where they are.
Absolutely, it's tricky. Having a lot of trouble with those. All right. I will, okay, and now they've disappeared. But there are two good ones in there. Give me 1 second.
Oh, I think I figured out how to find the questions, but I don't have my spectacles on. So question number one, this was intentional. There were no slides shared. I don't present with slides because it's a bit of a distraction. The recording will be available. So if you missed something or you weren't prepared to take notes, it's in the recording. It'll be valuable to listen again. The question about insurance companies limiting liabilities regardless of the maturity of the organization is a little tricky. So I spent a lot of time dealing with insurance, with cyber insurance. I even wrote an article about it this summer, and it was published in the Crisis Response Journal. But my ability to write the article was based on interviewing 50 different insurance professionals. And so the idea with cyber insurance is that things vary drastically depending on the insurance company that you're talking to. My recommendation if you're in North America is to find a good insurance broker who is licensed to provide insurance in the state where your headquarters for the company are, and that will set you up and put you on the right track. If you're outside North America, there's some great insurance companies based in Europe that can provide similar services. I just know more about North America than anywhere else. So there was one statement about the simplified approach to risk management. There are a ton of assets within an organization. And so what I described where the board is going to define their risk appetite and their risk capacity comes from a publication from COSO called Integrating with Strategy and Performance. And so a lot of people know about the COSO Cube. A lot of people know about the Enterprise Risk Management Framework from COSO. Very few people have seen the Integrating with Strategy and Performance. But as your organization scales, and has more and more assets, defining the risk appetite broadly across the organization, and then making sure that risk stays within those boundaries and making sure that everybody in the organization understands risk capacity is the highest boundary for losses means that it doesn't matter how many assets you have, as long as the board of directors is holding management accountable for operating within the boundaries, and then anything that goes outside the boundary is going to become a risk exception that requires formal documentation. And when I have the power to influence how everything works, any risk exception that exceeds risk capacity requires the board to sign off on it so that nobody's surprised. And I think given the time, I only have time for one more question. And so I'll give a plug to EC Council because they're the host of the Global CISO Forum. The Certified CISO as an academic program is probably the only certification that focuses 80% of the content on professionalism. You know, there's only one domain out of the 5 domains that focuses on security technology. When I teach it, I just call it essential cybersecurity controls, but everything else in the program is financial management, strategic planning, risk management, organizing and managing significant activities within the company. Those are going to be valuable things that you don't get in other programs. There's no disrespect to the other programs. It's just when I had the opportunity to help influence the content, our goal was to make it a MBA for security executives rather than make it something similar to everything else that was in the marketplace. And so with that, that's officially my time. If you reach out to Amber or EC Council, they will be happy to get you in touch with me. If you look me up on LinkedIn, I think I might be the only KEYAAN Williams, so I'm easy to find. But at the end of the day, I hope you receive significant value from the time that you dedicated in listening. And I hope that you have the opportunity to apply some of the things that I covered in your real work so that you can make a difference. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Amber. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day.
Great questions, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I put KEYAAN's email address, hope that was okay, KEYAAN, in the chat box so he can be in touch. Okay, see you at the next session, everyone. Bye-bye.